So Bryan Kohberger returned to court for the Idaho murders hearing with a surprise witness. This is now the second time that the defense has called in a witness, and this time it was Detective Mowery from Moscow Police Department. One of Mr Kohberger's lawyers asked Detective Mowery about documentation related to findings from 2 search warrants for the defendant's cell phone information, one covering a 48-hour period and another for a longer sequence of time. The detective then revealed that he'd come across the documentation about this information, but only the day prior, and this was as he prepared for yesterday's hearing. The defense is hoping to make the case that there's additional evidence it should have access to, and paint prosecutors as being withholding of key information. Now, this is regarding and questioning the methods in which the detective used to upload and store certain bits of information and data. The thing that's in question here is whether those bits of information or data are actually relevant to the case. Now, Ann Taylor's making the case that she should have access to whatever this information is. Now, we don't know what this information is, and again, don't know if it's relevant to the case. But retrospectively speaking, anything that pertains to this case, they should have access to. It just comes down and boils down to whether they should even have this information in the first place. But Ann Taylor has come across some filings in which she doesn't seem to be able to have access to, but she does see that they exist. And obviously for her client, as any defense should do, she's trying to ask prosecution what it is that this data, this video surveillance or audio actually is. And it could be something that's not relevant to the case, hence why it's not been given to her. But that was kind of what this boiled down to yesterday, and it was really hard because neither are experts in the field of what it was that they were speaking about. The detective isn't exactly an expert in what it is that he's going over, neither is Ann Taylor. And it was kind of like watching a hearing in which took place against Mark Zuckerberg, where they just had no real idea what on earth they were talking about, hence why they bring into play experts to discuss these fields. So it was quite lackluster in how this went down, because the defense here didn't exactly tip their hand into what it is they're trying to execute here. It's just that they want to understand how data was analysed and accessed between Bryan Kohberger's phone, in giving certain detectives and officers the location or certain regions in which his phone pinged from the night of the murders. Because Ann Taylor believes that she can prove with cell phone data that her client was roughly around 25 miles away, and this corroborates her story in which her client claims that his alibi was that he was miles away, simply driving his car around that night or stargazing, so on and forth. So they want to analyse and access this data of his cellular records. And it is obviously ironic that they want access to this without exactly giving the prosecution any access to how they believe that their client was 25 miles away. What they have done is got an expert in this, Cy Ray, to come forward as a witness to testify about what he believes ties Bryan Kohberger 25 miles away from the location of the murders at the time that they were being committed. This obviously then goes against video footage that they believe that they have of that individual's car the night in question in which 4 University of Idaho students were murdered. Again though, the defense do want some additional information which they believe can also help with video surveillance that can also tie their client 25 miles away from the scene of the crime. Because if there's any evidence that shows that their client was not where he says he was at the time that he said he was, it is a game, set and match. If the prosecution can prove that he's lying about the location in which he says that he is, then good luck to Ann proving anything else. Ann can have a load of things that are up her sleeve that are all true, and the one thing that might not be true is where her client said that he was. And if they can prove that, it muddies the water for Ann Taylor moving forward in any jury believing that what she's saying is somewhat truthful if her client is being caught out lying previously. The thing is though, is that cell phone data is the easiest thing to fight or dispute because it isn't exactly a specific location. It's general data, which is regional and isn't something that is site specific. So they have a region in which they can kind of say he could potentially be, but it doesn't mean that he's there. So these two things are now going completely head on with each other, as one is saying that he's here and the other is saying that he's here. And in this case, only one of these things can be right. I mean, let's not forget where the individual's DNA is, but that's another fight for another day. What the defense are doing here is simply trying to poke holes in the investigation. This isn't uncommon. That's what the defense should be doing here, as that's what the defense in this case believe is what happened. In the early stages before the big play, they try and remove, if possible, the smaller, weaker portions of evidence rather than battle this out in the later stages. The only thing that is unusual here is that it's an unusual thing to bring this into play this early on. Now, kind of smart in its own right because the case is under a gag order. We don't know any of the evidence that they even really have yet. We only have these small hearings in which we get drips and drabs of small bits of evidence or information, if we even get that. We're having to make complete guesswork as to what the next plays are from both sides because we don't have any evidence yet. People are making guesses and assumptions when we don't even have evidence. But then again, Chris Watts also has his own fan club and he literally detailed what he did to his ex-partner and children. So it doesn't surprise me that Bryan Kohberger too has his own kind of fan club here, in which they believe he's innocent before we've even seen the evidence unfold. The thing is though, is that when we have a lot of cut-off hearings from the public, we might not really get to see what the rebuttal to this is, if certain bits of evidence later on is then locked down and isn't something that the public are allowed access to. Simply meaning that this was something the defense could put into play now that doesn't really give us a lot of context as to what they're even going for, but can give out the context that the police are withholding information or that the prosecution are withholding information, with there being potential that we don't get to see why the prosecution withheld this information or what the information was that they were even withholding. And it's kind of smart from the defense to do this because the prosecution aren't really here to give us the information. They're not the ones that are trying to show the public or prove themselves to the public before you've even set a trial date that all the information that's being given to them is completely incorrect, as opposed to what the defense are trying to do here. So they're kind of just giving us one without the other because we, the public, can only be given so much context as to what it is that they're actually talking about. But that's it from me. It's just a quick rundown as to what I saw happening last night, as it was the early hours of the morning when this took place for me. But if you enjoyed, then drop a like and a follow as it really helps out the channel, and feel free to drop your thoughts in the comment section down below. Otherwise, have a great weekend.